Hello, it's 10-day trend time. So let's have a look at what we can expect weather-wise as we go through, well, the Halloween period and the bonfire period and beyond. At the moment, looking at the bigger picture, high pressure definitely in control. That's why there's a lot of fine settled weather around at the moment. But whilst we're looking at the bigger picture, let's head further south, and there's actually an area of low pressure that has caused a lot of devastation across parts of Spain, particularly around the Valencia region. It's led to almost 500 millimeters of rain in just 8 hours, so no wonder there's been some pretty horrific flooding in places, and that low pressure is drifting away towards the west. There's also a separate low out towards the Atlantic, but that's not going to affect the UK a huge amount. But now let's look at the jet stream. Why? Because it's important. It's always important for the UK's weather, and at the moment you can see it's quite actively running to the north of the UK, allowing for this high pressure that's been across the UK for a little while and will stick around for a little while yet to dominate our weather. As well as allowing for the high pressure, this jet stream, well, it is bordering just the far north of the UK. Look at those isobars. They're pretty tightly packed across the north of the UK around Scotland, so there will be some strong blustery winds as we go through Thursday, through Halloween across Scotland, much lighter winds elsewhere where you're closer to the centre of that high. But there's also a bit of rain around towards the far north, but we're going to see a bit more of that as we go through the next couple of days. As well as that, the jet stream is also forming that boundary between this cold Arctic air just to the north of us and then this milder air which much of the country is under for the time being. That cold Arctic air is then plunging southwards over parts of Europe instead. Meanwhile, we have that mild weather that we have at the moment. As we go through into Friday, however, we are going to see the jet stream pushing a little bit further southwards, and with that, front's going to make its way southwards, and behind that, that cold Arctic air I mentioned is actually going to start to edge its way into parts of Scotland, and so we are going to see a markedly fresher, chillier feel to things across parts of Scotland, whilst much of the UK stays on the milder side for the time being. High pressure, another high pressure still in control though, so staying fairly settled for much of the country. There will be some rain across northern parts, but that will start to shift away towards the east as we go through Saturday. A bit of uncertainty about the detail when it comes to Saturday, and I'll tell you why. Because if we look at the Met Office model, which I have here, and there's sort of a warm wave developing somewhere towards Iceland as we go into this weekend, but actually EC data suggests we could have an actual low develop over Iceland, and so that could change the details slightly. But generally, as we go through into this weekend, we're sticking with high pressure in control, albeit shifted slightly away towards the east, but nonetheless staying largely dominant over our weather. So lots of fine, largely dry weather still to come. It's been pretty cloudy at the moment, and that may continue for a time. However, because of this high drifting away towards the east, we are going to see a couple of things. After a slightly chillier spell, as we go through Friday across northern parts, I think the warm air is going to return across northern parts. But as well as that, because of the position of this high, if you actually track the wind, the air that's coming into southern parts, if you track that back its original source as we go through the end of the weekend and into the beginning of next week, we'll actually see that that air will be coming from, well, a much clearer, cleaner direction. And so with that then, I think whilst it's been pretty cloudy of late with the high pressure, and will be as we go into the weekend, we're going to see the air clearing up a little bit. So we're going to see greater breaks in the cloud. It's slightly fresher air, so we're going to see our temperatures dropping a little bit, but there's probably going to be a bit more sunshine on offer as we go into the beginning of next week. Now, one thing that we need to bear in mind, it is Halloween on Thursday, so let's look at the details. This is the 10-day trend, so I won't go into too much details. We are covering Halloween in most of our other forecasts, but just briefly, yes, there's a bit of rain, some blustery winds across parts of Scotland. Watch out for some gales here. Otherwise, a largely fine picture, and it's pretty mild with that. Not a huge amount of sunshine, quite cloudy, but pretty mild with temperatures in the mid-teens. And with that, with the high pressure, the largely cloudy skies, it's looking fairly decent if you're heading out trick-or-treating on Thursday evening away from the north-northwest of Scotland, where it's going to be pretty wet. The rain doesn't look especially heavy, but damp nonetheless, and there will still be some strong winds, albeit these will be easing. Elsewhere, largely calm, quite a bit of cloud, but the benefit of that cloud is, well, it may make things look a bit eerie, but it will also keep temperatures up. So you probably won't need a coat if you're heading out trick-or-treating. Otherwise, as we go overnight into Friday, we are going to see this front that I mentioned edging a little bit further southwards, so across the northern half of Scotland. By the early hours of Friday morning, it's going to be pretty wet here, some persistent rain feeding in. Meanwhile, across other areas, there may be some mist and fog patches developing, but it's looking mostly dry, apart from the odd spot of drizzly rain where the clouds thick enough, and like I say, quite cloudy for most of us. With that then, temperatures not dropping, so a mild start on Friday for most of us and staying pretty mild across most places, the exception being where we're to the north of this front as it pushes a little bit further southwards. Here we will have some of that Arctic air making its way in, and so it is going to feel quite a bit colder here. There will be some rain making its way southwards across Scotland with this front, but it breaks up and eases as it goes southwards, so shouldn't cause any major problems. Like I said, a chillier feel across northern parts, and when you factor in those brisk winds coming in from the north, it's going to feel even colder. Here are our feels-like temperatures for Friday, and for the Northern Isles it may even feel below freezing, so pretty raw indeed. Meanwhile, across the rest of the country, yes, not quite as mild as on Thursday, but nonetheless still pretty mild for the time of year. Heading further ahead and into the weekend, and with Bonfire Night coming up, there are a lot of celebrations to be had through this weekend as well. Saturday actually looks like a largely fine day. Most of that rain will have cleared away towards the east across northern parts. There will be some outbreaks of rain here or there. You can see some across parts of the West Country, southwest England, even central southern parts, seeing a few bursts of showery rain perhaps with that cloud. But on the whole, a largely dry story, and temperatures still fairly mild for the time of year, despite the fact that there may not be all that much sunshine around. Perhaps the greatest chance of some sunshine will be, well, in areas downwind of any higher ground, I guess. So eastern parts of Scotland could see some breaks, maybe even parts of Wales, southwest England, maybe southeast England perhaps may see some breaks, but on the whole, a largely cloudy story. Staying mostly dry with high pressure firmly in control as we go through Saturday night and overnight into Sunday. Like I said, there could be a number of fireworks displays going on, so that's pretty good conditions for any of those happening. Light winds as well are generally favoured conditions for any fireworks displays. Worth bearing in mind that similar to recent nights and preceding nights, we could see some mist and fog patches developing, and with that they could be made a little bit worse with any bonfires, fireworks going off. So there could be a bit of a fog issue as we go through the night, Saturday night into Sunday. But as we wake up on Sunday morning, it's looking largely dry, perhaps a touch fresher than it has been through some recent nights, but not especially chilly. Just where we get any clear skies, it may be a touch fresher, particularly towards the south, than of late. As we go through Sunday itself, and another largely fine day, relatively similar to Saturday really. Again, a few spots of rain here or there, but not that many. Most of us will stay dry, and actually with that slightly cleaner air mass that I mentioned coming through, I'm expecting a bit more sunshine, more breaks in the cloud to develop compared to Saturday. Yes, it is a slightly cooler, chillier air mass, and so temperatures on paper, well, they are going to be a couple of degrees lower for many places. But with the sunshine, when you factor that in, if anything, it might feel a little bit warmer for most of us on Sunday compared to Saturday. So a generally fine weekend for most of us, which is good news for anyone with any outdoor activities planned. But whilst we talk about those temperatures, let's have a look in comparisons of our forecast temperatures to average for the time of year. And on the top I have our forecast highs compared to average, our daily highs, and on the bottom I have our forecast daily mins compared to average. And generally you can see, looking at our highs, they're going from, well, on Friday, Saturday to around or a little bit above average for the time of year, and similar on Sunday, especially in the north. By Monday, starting to see our temperatures dropping down, and it's a similar story across, if we look at our overnight temperatures. Thursday night, markedly milder than average for the time of year, and staying that way as we go through the next couple of nights. But as we go towards the beginning of next week, we're going to see a slight change. Slightly fresher air, clearer air means a greater chance of seeing some frost as we go into next week, something we've not seen a huge amount of recently. But this is the 10-day trend, and I've talked a lot about what's going to happen through the next few days, but now let's look further ahead. And well, it's a relatively simple story, in as much as the same high pressure that comes through as we go over this weekend is going to continue to dominate our weather as we go through much of next week. There's some uncertainty, but actually relatively high confidence in the forecast for next week that this high pressure will stick around. And what we often see with these kind of high pressures is, well, forecast models suggest that fronts will come in from the west and they'll bash against this high and they'll try to break it down. But often we see the high winning out, and actually it may take quite a while for a breakdown to develop. Nonetheless, there are going to be some fronts coming in from the Atlantic and they will hit against this high, but I think on Monday we're going to be under the influence of that high pressure, and so it is looking largely fine and dry with our air coming around it. And so that plays a part in the fact that it's going to be a bit fresher than the preceding few days. If we go looking further ahead, and Tuesday, Bonfire Night also looks largely fine. Again, these fronts starting to come in from the west, maybe starting to see some impacts of that wet weather towards the far west of the UK, possibly. But I think a greater chance that we're going to see the high pressure dominating and keeping our weather largely settled. If we go through the next couple of days through next week, you can start to see there's a greater chance of seeing those fronts making their way through. The most likely ECMWF regime for next Thursday has rain across northwestern parts of the UK, but this is no guarantee. There's still a reasonable chance that those fronts won't actually make their way much across the UK, if at all, and so we could stay completely dry, or largely dry at least. And in fact, if we look at the most likely regimes for both Friday, Saturday and also Sunday, they stick with, yes, some wet weather perhaps towards the northwest of the UK, but most places staying largely dry and largely settled. Like I said, there is some uncertainty, but confidence is a little bit higher than usual, and so the generally fine picture, or generally dry picture at least, looks pretty likely. We just do need to bear in mind that there could be some fronts trying to come in from the west. However, I think that high pressure is likely to win. We can look at all that in a slightly different way, and if we look at our weather regime probabilities, and if you've not seen this chart before, the orange and the reds indicate high pressure is most likely, which is what we have through the next few days. And in fact, as we go through much of next week, when you add the orange and reds together, high pressure is most likely compared to the blues, which indicate low pressure, and high pressure generally saying more settled weather. And so it looks pretty likely as we go through the next 2 weeks or so that high pressure is going to dominate. But some signs, particularly as we go further ahead, that we could see something of a breakdown developing. If we look at that in a different way, and if we look at the probabilistic pressure trend, and again the reds indicating high pressure most likely, and that's what we have through the whole of the 2-week period, but the numbers do change. 100% confidence as we go through the next couple of days, through this coming weekend, even into the beginning and middle of next week, 100% confidence that we are going to see high pressure generally in control. But that figure does actually drop off a little bit as we go through towards the end of next week and towards Remembrance Sunday and beyond. That's what you'd expect. The further you go ahead in time, the less confidence you have, but still it looks like it's going to be quite a slow progress, or slow change to anything more unsettled. We can see that we are likely to see a change eventually to something breaking down from the west if we look at our zonal trend. Remember, zonal trend shows us whether our air is going to be coming in from the west or the east. Now, blue's indicating that a westerly flow is most likely, which is kind of what we have at the moment, and then it switches to that easterly with the position of the high. As that high goes through, change our wind direction, so we have that easterly develop. But as we go towards the latter part of next week and beyond, that's when we get that westerly developing again with those blues highlighted here. And so that goes in line with the idea that, yes, we are going to generally see high pressure in control through the next week or so, perhaps a little bit more, and then eventually we will see that breakdown coming in from the west. And so eventually we will say goodbye to the high. But for the time being, lots of fine settled weather around. Great news if you're heading out trick-or-treating through Thursday evening, or if you're heading to any fireworks displays. Whatever your plans are this Halloween and this bonfire night, I do hope you have a great one. I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.